Hello, my name is Katie Monty, and I am one of the Assistant Directors in the Office of Disability Services at UNC Charlotte. And I'm here today with some students to talk about disability culture, to talk about experiences living with a disability. And we hope that you will find this information to be enlightening and informative, and maybe help you have a different perspective by the end of the video. So I'm going to now ask the students to introduce themselves.
I'm Anna. I'm a junior and I'm a special education major.
My name is Shauna. I'm a junior and I go to the College of Business.
My name is Tevin. I'm a sophomore and I'm a criminal justice major.
My name is Emily and I'm a senior and I'm a sociology major.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about disability services and living with a disability. Emily, if you would, how have you talk a little bit about how you've responded to others on campus, different types of people on campus who ask about your disability?
Pretty positively. I mean, sometimes people will ask me questions and, I don't really see the need to get upset about it. So I just answer pretty positively and correctly.
Mm-hmm.
That's about it.
How do you feel about talking about your disability? Is it, are you comfortable doing that? Are you uncomfortable doing that? Is it unusual or is it very common?
I mean, personally, I'm really comfortable with it because I've had both my disabilities since I was in, the third grade. So by this point in my life, I'm just sort of like, people are going to ask questions and the easiest thing to do is just answer.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Shauna, how about you? How have you responded to those kind of situations?
Well, a lot of times people don't realize that I have a disability, and so unless it gets mentioned in conversation, no one really asks me anything. But if they do, I'm pretty open and honest. Like, I'm very comfortable with talking about my disability, my strengths and weaknesses, limitations, and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
I agree. I think the only time it really comes up is I wear a medical bracelet. So I mean, clearly can't tell I have a disability, but it'll come up if people see that.
Mm-hmm.
Mine is a little bit similar because people wouldn't really notice unless they pay attention. But like you all, I'm also very open about my disability as well, and always willing to talk to another so they don't make an assumption that is not true.
90% of people with on this campus with disabilities have a disability that is completely hidden. So you would never know that they have a disability, and I think that's pretty evident today because no one would necessarily know immediately that any of you had a disability. And as you said, Tevin, sometimes you might notice, but initially in any kind of initial meeting, they wouldn't necessarily know that. And that's really, I think, important because it's easy to assume certain things, I think, about having a disability, or assuming that a person does not have a disability because it's not really obvious. And I also think that all of you in the roles that you play with our office are really accustomed to disclosing what your disability is, and you're comfortable doing that. But it is important to know that legally you are not required in any way to disclose what your disability is. And in fact, it's not appropriate to ask someone what their disability is. If they have a disability, the Americans with Disabilities Act is in place to protect an individual's confidentiality. So I think that's a really important piece. All of you are comfortable, but I would say the majority of students registered with our office are not comfortable disclosing what their disability is. And it's not a good idea to ask and to put them in an uncomfortable situation. Anna, how do your instructors respond when you provide them your accommodation letter from our office, from Disability Services?
Normally it's pretty good, but I remember freshman year, it was like my first class, like I just gotten here, I was living in the dorm. First day of class, it was like my 18th birthday, so I'm like pumped, I'm ready to go, it's college, And I get to like my first class like ever, and I like went to hand my professor my paperwork, everyone wants to go talk to them after class. It was a large class, probably like 100, 150 kids. And he just looked at me and turned his back, and I was like, is this what it's going to be like through college? Like, I was really taken back, and it was just, I don't know, it was terrible. I went home and dropped the class. I didn't know what else to do.
Wow.
But, like, that's probably, like, the worst experience I've had. A lot of professors, like, some professors are kind of, like, taken back. Like you said, it's a hidden disability, so they're kind of like, that's weird. I can tell they make assumptions and stuff like that. But I've had really positive experiences normally.
Right, right. That's a shame that you experienced that your very first
It
class,
was
your
terrible.
freshman year. That's hard, because it's
It
hard
was.
enough at that age, I
Exactly.
think, to approach faculty and learn how to advocate for yourself.
It was
you
the
might be
first
used to your
time.
parents doing that for you.
Right, it was the first time I had to go talk to somebody by myself. In high
Right.
school, everything's done for you. Everybody already knows before you talk to them, so
Sure.
that was hard.
Right. Sure. Tevin, how about you? How has it worked for you when you've given instructors your letters?
I have actually had a really positive experiences with my instructors. For example, like my first class, it was an English class, and my professor, I actually went and talked to him. We actually went and sat and had lunch, discussed things, how
Wow.
he could help me throughout the semester. And I've had that happen more than once, actually, where they have extended, their time to me, and even at times when I didn't really need it. So all my professors actually had known me by my first name, and have in some form extended their time to me in that way, like my first class. So it's been very positive, and I've had really good luck with that, and having some really good professors.
Great.
Most of my professors they don't really say anything. They just say, okay, thanks, and then that's it. But your story reminded me when I went to my first English class in freshman year, and I think it was like the last class of the day. I handed my accommodation letter to my professor, and she asked me about it, and I'm open about my disability, so I explained what my disability was and how that might affect the class role, and she laughed at me, and it really sucked.
Really?
Yeah, it was like a terrible experience. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
I didn't know what to do. I was like,
And she asked you what your disability was?
She asked me if I felt comfortable disclosing it, and I do. So I told her what my disability was. So that was completely appropriate. It was, she's like, well, that's not going to have any effect on your English class, and she laughed about it, and I was like, wow, that's not cool. Like it's not really funny to me. Like
Sure.
yeah,
Absolutely.
It was not a good time. But everything after that, like I had no other problems after that.
Interesting. And she probably wasn't intentionally trying to be disrespectful or but certainly it did.
Well, yeah, it kind of hurt my feelings
Sure.
a little bit. Yeah.
Absolutely. Sure. Tevin, has there been any one accommodation that you have found to be particularly helpful to you with your classes?
Yes, the accommodation that I find most helpful is the note taker program that the office offers to us. At times I find it really hard, even sitting in the front, having preference to sit in the front in the class. It's still hard to take notes. So the note taker program is one of the best things, one of the best accommodations that I receive, along with, if they have PowerPoints, being able to have access to those as well.
Can you talk a little bit about class notes and just a brief thing about how it works?
So what the note taker program is the office sends out an email to the students in the class who have a person with a disability who has this accommodation to receive notes from an anonymous note taker. And that note taker receives volunteer hours for taking those notes, scanning them in the office after class, and making sure that person is able to succeed in that class. It really helps out, and it really has helped me as well. So,
Great. Emily, how about you?
For me, I also get notes, but I think the one that really helps me a lot is being able to test outside of class, because I get distracted really easy, and it takes me a bit longer to write things down, especially by hand. So sometimes I need to be out of the room where I can have a little you know, my own space with no distractions, and then I also get extra time. So pairing that with the extra time, it gives me, you know, a low distraction environment where I can take a little extra time to maybe rewrite, reorganize, because it takes me a little while to get it all out on paper.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. Do y'all have any accommodations that have been particularly
I mean,
helpful?
the class nights are good as well. Just in like large lecture classes, like inside my major, I don't need them because there's only a few people. There's no distractors, and then it's not an accommodation. But on my list, I have one that says stamina fatigue, and that's kind of more. And like reasonable breaks is needed, and like that's kind of just a heads up that like there's gonna be days that are a lot worse than others, like related to my disability. And then there's also a little thing on there that the class attendance. Hopefully, they understand that there are gonna be days where I have a disability-related absence.
Sure.
So that's always the best for me.
Right, right. Shauna, in your experience, do instructors struggle to maintain the confidential nature of an individual's disability status? Have you ever encountered issues with that? And you really have talked about that a little bit already.
Yeah. You know, so there's a small percentage of professors even show an interest in knowing anything beyond, oh, this is what you get, and then move on. But it has happened before where a professor has known about my disability, and of course I'm open about it, but she did kind of take me by surprise because we were talking in class. We talked a lot before class would start, and we have these conversations about it, and then she kind of announced to the classroom that you know, what my disability was and everything and stuff like that, and it just, and I'm completely fine with that. Like me, I'm okay with that, but it did take me by surprise.
Ooh.
And I can only imagine what would happen if it was a student who wasn't as open about their disability as I was, because I think that probably would not be a good time for them, because some people are very sensitive about their disabilities, and so to them it's almost seen as a detriment. They don't want other people to see that they are struggling or they have
perceived as less than
right,
in some way.
yeah. And so to have the whole classroom kind of know about that, for me, I'm cool with it. And it actually ended up being like this huge educational period where I talked to like all of my classmates about it. But that's just me kind of flipping it from like what just happened to, okay, well, here's my chance to educate everybody about it. But yeah, I would feel very bad for someone who did not want to disclose their disability in that manner and have that just kind of pushed out for them.
Not to mention, that is a violation of federal law.
I mean,
that person is fortunate that you kind of flowed with it and said, let me turn this around and let's make this a learning experience, because that could have gone much differently.
But that's one accident, and I don't think she even meant it that, you know
Sure.
what I mean? Like, it was totally innocent, and like I said, most professors have no interest in even knowing what the disability. Like, they don't talk about it at all. It's like it's a wall that just separates kind of us from them. I feel like, and so if they don't know it, they have no chance to say anything. Yeah.
Right. I see what you're saying. Tevin, how about you? Have you had any experiences with or issues with confidentiality around your disability?
My experience probably would be the same. I've had that professor who's put my disability out in front of an entire class.
Really?
But you know, a lot like Shauna, pretty much the same. I wasn't really hurt by it, but you know, I mean, I guess if I was a little bit more sensitive about my disability, yeah, because it was often, it was like every day, like, but I thought it was hilarious.
Really?
Yes, I personally thought it was hilarious. I was very flattered that, you know, he went out of his way, you know. But I mean, I could see like where it would be a problem, you know, I mean, but I did not correct him on it because I was fine with it, but maybe in the future I probably would correct a professor on doing that, because you know, you might not want to do that and get you in some trouble.
Yeah, it might be an opportunity for you to educate the instructors on.
I
don't mind, but just so you know. Right.
I mean, I've had a professor, you know, I gave him my note, and then they referred to me in class. They kind of just gestured towards me, you know, like, oh, you know, the assignment's due unless, you know, you have a disability. And I was kind of like,
Oh.
and I kind of felt like obligated to then tell the class what my disability was, because you don't want to be labeled as the person with a disability in class.
Wow.
Yeah, so, and I did go up and talk to the professor later and just say, like, you know, I'm really open about what my disability is, but, you know, it wasn't really appropriate, and I don't appreciate you doing that.
Yeah,
And they were really understanding.
They
but-
kind of put it in like a negative context too.
Yeah.
Like it's like, well, everyone else has to do this except for the person with a disability. They,
Yeah.
you know, like because it's so like open ended in that way.
Mhm.
I think I would not be happy.
Yeah,
with
like
that.
I think I would have referred if they had just said what my disability was instead of just disability.
Not to mention that that's an inaccurate statement, because students are required to meet all the course requirements regardless of a disability. So ironically enough, I mean, there should not be an exception for
Yeah.
you because you have a disability in a due date, or, you know.
Yeah. I think I
So-
actually, just to kind of shove it in their face, I think I turned in the assignment early and got like 100 on it. I was like, huh, turning it early.
Wow, that's really interesting. Yeah, that had an impact on you. I mean,
Yeah.
certainly. Okay. Anna, do people ever ask you, I mean, we could talk about instructors specifically or just people in general, do people ever ask you strange or unexpected questions, whether you disclose or don't disclose your disability? I mean, but have you had people ask, like, well, what medicine do you take? And, well, why do you get class notes? Or, you know, why aren't you here to take tests or something like that?
I've never had any questions, but you notice that people look at you a lot more. People
Really?
like pay more attention to you, like professors. They kind of like, I don't know if they're trying to be nice by keeping an eye on you, but like stuff like that. They'll like ask how you're doing more often than they ask other people, you know? It's kind of like, I mean, I don't know if they pity you or if they like have good intentions, but if you're gonna ask me, ask everybody else too, you know? Like, don't single me out, don't ask that.
Right. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about you, Emily? Any
Um,
strange questions?
Yeah, I've had strange questions, you know, like about like what foods I can eat, and you know, I've had stuff about like medications I take. You know, people ask me if the medication I take was made from lizards, and I just like I didn't quite know how to respond to that. But I just kind of looked at them and said no. But but yeah, same with Anna. Like teachers sometimes, I don't want to say baby you, but they
Yeah.
it's almost like parenting you.
Yeah.
Oh, how are you doing? Do you need anything? It's like, no, I'm good.
I wonder if it's because you guys are so young, because I totally don't get that.
You don't get that
No.
from faculty?
No, but I'm a little older than the average student too, so my professors kind of expect me to just do my job and then that's it. Yeah.
I wonder if that's a factor. It might be.
It could be.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as far as like strange questions, the weirdest thing I'll get is like 20 missed calls from classmates when we have a test, and then when
Yeah.
Oh.
because I'm not there on those days, but I'm
Right.
probably the first person there on a normal day of class. So
I see.
Yeah.
So they're worried that you have forgotten to take the test that day.
Yeah,
But
I
you're
always-
taking it in disability services.
yeah, they always think I missed the test. Like, oh, you missed the test. You're probably gonna fail. No, I got an A on it.
Right. Tevin, based on sort of the discussion we're having today and the topics that we're talking about today, have you had a particularly memorable interaction at the university that you'd like to share? Maybe positive or negative or humorous or whatever you think.
Other than my social interactions with people, I can't think of any memorable interactions that I could share right now.
Okay. Sure. Shauna, what about you?
There's a couple that I could think about. One professor for business calculus, which I really struggle with, like terribly struggle with. Pretty much after every class period, he would sit down with me for like 15 minutes and kind of explain like what we went over in class and kind of work it out for me, because sometimes when you explain something, you explain it in a way, and you see like 90% of the class like nod their heads. Those that aren't asleep or whatever, nod your head. They're understanding. I'm like, I'm almost there. Like I just need that little bit of help.
Right.
So he would kind of clarify everything for me, and it was a huge help. Like I passed the class barely, but I worked really hard
Sure.
to even get like the barely portion of it. And then I had another professor just not too long ago actually who I had some questions about this paper that I had to write, and we sat down and talked about the paper, and then we just started talking about like because I disclosed my disability, so we started talking about my disability. He's like, well, is there a way that I could like reach like, is there a way that I could talk or teach or show something and that would help, that would benefit? And I was like, so we went into all of that stuff. It was really interesting.
That's great.
Yeah, he took a really big interest in how my thought processes might be different, in compared to non-disabled students. And then after that, we just started just chatting about random stuff. But it was a really good conversation. I mean, it really stood out. Like I've been going to school here for years, and that definitely stood out like above everything else.
That is fantastic. And it sounds like that faculty member too is sort of probably has more of an awareness about universal design with teaching, which I know we do try to emphasize a lot on campus, and that's basically teaching in different modalities so that everyone in the class can understand the content or can access the content. So for example, if someone is hard of hearing, then they might repeat questions that the other students are asking the instructor that day so that person makes sure they don't miss it. Or if they provide, if they write on the board, for example, that they make sure that it's available in another format as well, in case someone can't see that board clearly. We have lots of students who might read lips, and so it can be helpful to make sure that the instructor's facing forward all the time. But just thinking about how people in one classroom could learn in many different ways and trying to teach in ways that reach all of them that's great.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. Okay. Shauna, I'm going to back to you again. What advice do you have for a faculty member who has questions on how they can best accommodate you? It's really what you were just talking about. Sounds like you had a good conversation. What would you recommend for anybody who in faculty that might ask you that or need suggestions?
Well, I would say that first and foremost, the faculty member has to walk a careful line between asking the student what their disability is and asking them how they can best help. Yeah. So you don't need to know what the disability is to know to ask how you can help them. But asking, I think, is the key part. So I think it kind of is a pet peeve of mine that I hand in the form to the professor and they say, okay, and then that's pretty much it. I personally would like to see a little bit more interest from the faculty member on, what if I'm hard of hearing and I'm in a 300-person classroom? Those professors never wear mics,
That's a good point.
So, even just asking simple questions like, do you need assistance with hearing, or maybe even that might be a little bit much, wouldn't it?
It could be.
Yeah, maybe just how can I help you would probably be the best way to go. Like just general, leave it in the hands of the student. The student will talk about what they feel comfortable talking about and just kind of leave it at that.
I like that. That's good advice. Just how can I help you? Anna, what do you think?
I agree, completely agree. Because some professors are like, okay, and unless I continue the conversation, if I choose to disclose, the conversation's not going anywhere. But if you do disclose, like, I don't know, sometimes you have to keep the conversation. There are professors that ask how they can help. I've had some really great professors. Like, yeah, I've had the bad experience as well, but you don't know unless you ask. And you can't ask too much. Like, you ask what they're comfortable with.
Yeah.
Sure. Right.
I think that a professor who also holds the students to a standard kind of helps as well, because at times I may need help, but I may not want to say. But if the professor's getting up there in the time where he's like going over the syllabus and he mentions the part about disability services and he lets me know I'm comfortable, come to me if you need help, and extends that hand, but leaving the ball in the student's court to say you're responsible for speaking up for yourself, which is something we all have to learn when we first come here.
Yeah.
Because we have to be advocates for ourselves. I think the teacher who does that as well, letting us know that we're responsible, is doing the right thing as well. You know, because you can look out for us all you want to with having a disability, but honestly, if you're thinking from the perspective of the teacher, it's kind of putting more work on them when they already have to teach 200 students in a class. So that teacher is saying you're responsible for letting me know when you need help. You know, that has helped me. So I think that is something that the staff members should take into account too. You need to establish some sense of responsibility for the student.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to, like, this is college, this isn't high school, there's no plans, there's no parent that's going to hold your hand. Like, it's up to you to be able to advocate for yourself, but it does help if, you know, professors are open-minded about it. You know, just having that open-mindedness and the openness to be able to ask questions and stuff like that is probably pretty influential.
Sure. Right. I think those are all really good points, for sure. And it is true, students have to provide this letter, you know, of accommodation to faculty in order to receive any accommodations. And in fact, we ask that faculty not provide accommodations unless they've gotten one of these letters from us to verify, you know, that this is a legitimate need. But it is up to the student and up to the student to elaborate on what they need. And we encourage students to actually provide these letters to faculty, and I think y'all probably do this most of the time. Well, you were just talking about this, Shauna. Providing the letter to them in their office and during office hours can make a big difference in maybe providing an opportunity to have that conversation rather than providing the letter to them like right before class starts or right after class ends. That can be tricky. Sometimes you may know a faculty member, you've had them before, so you might give them the letter because you've already been through a conversation. But we really do encourage a conversation about accommodations to happen in an office and outside of the classroom. So it gives both people a chance to elaborate if they want to, if needed. Yeah. I'm going to ask all of you this question. What are there changes to process, facilities, etc., that you think could make UNC Charlotte more user-friendly for students with disabilities? Any ideas or suggestions?
I think because we have, you know, we're a commuter campus, but we also have a huge student population that lives on campus, who dines on campus, and, you know, we get all of our meals on campus. Nutrition would be really important because, you know, you don't necessarily think nutrition and disability, but it is, because, you know, people have allergies, people need to know, like, what's in the food. So it would be really important to get that nutritional information out there, because as a whole student, I think a whole student body could, like, benefit from it in general. But it would really, you know, help for people like me, you know, with my disability, to be able to go to the dining hall and see what is in the food I'm eating, and being able to, you know, get that information so I can keep myself healthy, because otherwise it's just a guess.
Right, that's a good point. And you pay a lot of money for the
meal
plan, so.
I think just making it accessible, like for people, I know people in wheelchairs and stuff like that, like there's sometimes that you hit the thing to have the door open and it just doesn't open like it should, or it's slow, and like there's really not too many ramps or things inside the building, like little things like the flickering lights, and I think that kind of just needs to be paid attention to.
Yeah, a lot of the doors to the classrooms, I have the little feet
Yeah.
that pop down, and so you have to get someone to hold the door open for you if you're in a chair to be able to get in and out of the classrooms.
I actually had not thought about that.
Yeah,
The little rubber stopper thing, but that interferes with the width for a wheelchair, doesn't it?
It does, because the doorways are on the older buildings. The doorways are a little too narrow, and so you end up having to hold the door open for them anyways. But from their perspective, if they don't have anyone to do that for them, they really struggle to get in and out of the classroom.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
it's a very large campus, and it's a very hilly campus, and I know we've talked about that before, the classes and such. It can be really difficult to get around, and you can put yourself in a manual wheelchair and try to go from point A to point B and realize how incredibly difficult it can be. Not only physically difficult, but you have to really know your routes because you can't use stairs. So you have to know where the ramps are and how to get from here. So it can be tricky, for sure.
Well, I think like other than physical barriers, like they should really make sure there's like subtitles on movies, because you know, like people who can't hear, they really need to have a subtitle, and it's not fair if, you know, the whole class is sitting there watching a movie and then they have to go up and say, is there any way I can get this so I can watch it in my own time, so I can be able to, you know, have access to the information. But also stuff like volume, because a lot of the videos I've noticed, like the volume just isn't loud enough for me.
Oh, really?
So people
Okay.
who have a hearing disability, like, they would never be able to hear it. So
Yeah, I don't have a hearing disability, but it does help for me to see the subtitles. And I don't know if you guys have ever tried to use the YouTube subtitles,
Oh,
but
they
like,
don't work.
I get links all the time for classes for me to watch these videos at home, and the subtitles don't work, and it helps me process if I can hear it and see it, and kind of switch back and forth. And
Yes.
terrible, truly terrible. I think it's like the worst subtitles
I don't
I've
know
ever
where they
seen
come
before.
from. Yeah, I don't know where the words come from.
I don't know. It doesn't make any sense half the time. So,
Right.
but yeah, it is a good point to have subtitled videos, even if you don't have someone who's hearing disabled. Just sometimes even people with cognitive disabilities, you know, need to be able to read it off the screen.
And I'm really glad that you both brought that up, because there is a fairly new court decision made through the Office for Civil Rights, and they actually just sent what they call their letter of intent, which is essentially like a warning, you know, that they expect materials, all course materials for a class, to be accessible from day one. And that would include videos, that they are automatically captioned, that text and PowerPoints and other online materials are accessible, maybe to people who use a screen reader, things like that. And I liked the analogy that they used. They said, think of it like a doorway into a classroom. If on the first day of your class, someone was in a wheelchair and they couldn't get through the door, you would immediately do something about that, right? Because they're a student in the class and they have to be in the class. And they said to look at it that way, that it's the same thing. If materials are not accessible on the first day, then you are not providing an accessible class, and you are violating the law. So that's new and big, and something that I think our campus is working hard to do. And we have staff that actually assist with captioning videos. It can be difficult because there's a lot of old videos out there and things like that. So we have staff that can assist with that, because basically the Department of Justice, the Office of Civil Rights, is saying, this is your warning, this is expected. And in fact has fined the University of South Carolina community college system for not having captioned videos and not having accessible content on their websites that are required pieces of a course. So it's not okay to have someone have to wait a week to watch the video that was shown on the first day of class, because they're hard of hearing or deaf.
well, it also forces them to pretty much disclose to their professor, you know, if they have to individually go up there and say, I know we watched this movie, but I can't hear, I need this way. It's like it's forcing them to disclose if they chose not to.
That's a great point. That's a great point, because people do not have to they don't have to come to our office and get services, and many people choose not to. They might have a disability that significantly impacts their daily lives, but for whatever personal reason, they choose not to receive accommodations, and they have the right to do that. But that's another good argument for universal design, for having everything accessible, no matter who comes through your door that first day of class. So
I agree. I think it's great that's going out, because you probably have a mix of professors. There's probably professors that don't want to do it because they don't have time, this, that, and the other. But there's also professors that just don't think of it. Like
Sure,
they're not
absolutely.
intentionally trying to hurt these students,
Sure.
but I mean, if you, without a disability or without much knowledge, you wouldn't think of little things like that, you know.
Absolutely. I mean, I do it for a living,
And there's still things.
and there are still things
Yeah.
that I go, oh, like what
Like
you were
today.
saying with the little stopper on the door. I was like, oh, that's a good point. Oh, I need to make a note of that. Yeah, and I had not thought until recently about how captioned videos could help other types of disabilities, not just people who are deaf or hard of hearing. Many people benefit from seeing the text and hearing it at the same time. So different things. Really good point.
I agree.
Faculty are not alone, and we don't necessarily expect them to automatically know all of these
Exactly.
things. But that's a good reason to kind of share this information because it is informative. In terms of living with a disability, do any of you, and I realize this might be difficult because we really don't need to disclose what your disability is, but do any of you have stories about any personal experiences that you'd like to share?
I mean, I've had both my disabilities since, really early on, so I have definitely a lot of stories. But I feel like people, like, babied me. It was almost like they put me in a bubble because they were afraid, like, oh, I might hurt them, or, oh, like, I can't leave them alone, So I kind of felt like they were kind of babying me. And then other times I felt like because I had a disability, I could get away with anything. Because, if you say it, it's like, oh, okay, you have a disability, so.
Sure. And if you're a young person,
Who's
you're
not
gonna
going to
use
take
that.
advantage of that? Like, oh, you don't have to do your homework. Okay. So.
Sure.
Yeah, just to like branch off like what she's saying, like like when we're younger, we notice a lot of the things that we can get away with, and our limitations at times. But like coming to college, I have experience, trying to do extracurricular things other than academic things, and I just find it hard, to convey to people like, hey, I may want to do this extracurricular activity, but my academics comes first. And while I applaud you for motivating me and to say yes, you can do all this, I'm telling you that I can't, because it takes me a lot longer to do things than a normal person, a person without a disability. And I appreciate you trying to motivate me, but you really have to respect my decision to say, no, I can't take this opportunity that you're extending to me. And a lot of times people just don't understand that why I'm saying the things I'm saying, and they just keep pushing me. But I'm saying I know my limits, I know me, I'm the one living with my impairment, so just respect my decision to say, I can't do this. Sometimes you have to listen to the person, and people don't always do that. They just, I'm glad that people don't treat a person with a disability like they have a disability, but sometimes it really gets to that point and they still refuse to listen because they're so caught up on not hurting my feelings.
Interesting. That's really interesting. It's sort of as an effort to not in any way incorporate your disability. They, in fact, might push too far.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, a lot of times it happens with your friends and family, unfortunately, the people who are closest to you. And that's when it becomes a problem. But we learn how to deal with that and adapt to the situation like we have to do with anything else. So
I don't know. No one babies me. Like I feel like people are harder on me when I disclose my disability
Really?
than before because it's hidden in such a way, because it's not immediately obvious. People's first reaction is that I'm not working hard enough to overcome, areas that I'm
Really?
weaker at. Yeah, it's definitely been a point at work recently.
Okay.
That keeps coming up, that their view is that I'm not trying hard enough to overcome these things, and it's all like my fault. Like I'm just not working at it, or I'm not doing what I need to do to be able to, get to the point where everyone else is.
Wow.
On certain areas. Yeah, it's really frustrating.
And that's interesting because if you used an analogy of, well, if I couldn't walk, because of a disability, would you be asking me to, okay, you just really need to learn how to walk?
Yeah,
You know,
it's
they wouldn't say
completely-
that if it were that type of disability.
No, it's completely different for disabilities that are really well hidden. You know, and I try to do everything I can to equal the playing field. But any accommodations I ask for work get pretty much shot down immediately. They're just like,
Really?
you just need to learn how to, you know, communicate in this way. You need to learn how to, you know, do it this way. Yeah, it's rough.
Do you, in your opinion, do you think that's, and all of you can answer this, do you think that that's common in the workplace? Or do you think it's specific to maybe your, I mean, not specific to your employer, but I'm just wondering, I wonder how much that is experienced out in the work field.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing my job, my type of job for 14 years, and across the board, every company I've worked at, I've had to deal with that, just nonstop. It's always been like it's my fault that I have this issue.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, my disability, it didn't start affecting me until I was 15, and I wasn't diagnosed until I was 16. It was just a whole year-long process. So it's different than you guys. You guys were diagnosed young, and mine was like normal life, and then just a total 180 where my entire life changed, you know? Like, it was really, really, really difficult at the time. Like, employers, I mean, I was babied. I wasn't pushed, which, I mean, hurt me in the long run. Like, I went back to school. I was in high school, and it was like, oh, you're not able to do this. You're not able to do that. Like, that's a lie. I can do absolutely everything you guys, like, everybody else can do, you know?
Didn't you say that,
So-
like, you just, sometimes they just kind of said, you can just go to sleep?
Oh, I had a teacher in high school. I had a 32 in the class. She wrote in my progress report, don't worry about this class. Well, I'm not going to worry about it if you're telling me not to worry about it. So I still don't know
Right.
that subject. Never learned Spanish, nothing like that.
And there's that assumption that, well, you have a disability, so
Right.
obviously you can't do this.
And like when I do disclose to professors, like they should understand it has nothing to do with my academics. Like I can do the same thing. Like, yeah, I might be tired one day, I might miss class because I really need to for if I end up in the hospital or anything like that. But that was probably the worst part of the disability, and people stereotyping you and wrong assumptions, stuff like that.
Right. Right.
I mean, I've had people also tell me like my disability doesn't exist, like it's not real, it's in my head, and it's like I've been diagnosed by doctors and you know like all these people, like it is real. So, and it's almost like a slap in the face because it's like, oh well, that's not really a problem, it's just in your head, and it's like not really, but
That's
I mean,
so demeaning to say
yeah.
that.
yeah, it's like, ugh, okay. But I've also like had problems at work, and like people tell me like if I make a mistake, it's not because I made a mistake like everyone else. It was because of my disability, and like you know, and it was just kind of like, okay, so everyone makes mistakes, but if you have a disability, you're under this microscope, and if you make a mistake, then there's a problem and there's a legal situation, and it's like. So.
Just carries, it seems to have more weight around
Yeah.
it than it should.
It's a bit unfair. so.
Right, right. And I think a lot of what we're talking about has so much to do with assumptions that people make, which can get you into a lot of trouble, for sure, you know.
That's probably the most hurtful part too, is when you have the assumptions. Like that's really hurtful. Because especially like they might talk about it, or like you said, people are like, oh, that doesn't exist. Like that's not fair to say to anybody at all. And like you said, under a microscope, like everybody, like my mistakes, my life, I mean, it doesn't revolve around my disability. Like that's such a small part of me. But people pay more attention to you. You can tell professors just pay so much more attention to you. I don't know if they're scared something's gonna happen or what, but like I don't really want to be looked at the whole class. I'm sorry.
Right.
Look at other people too.
That would make me self-conscious,
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
really
if the
awkward.
professor was just staring at me the whole time.
Yeah.
Right. Even if it comes from a good place, it's still
Exactly.
not a good thing to do.
Or like with assumptions, like I remember in one of my classes, like it was one of our elective classes, and everyone like had to read out loud. Like every day we just like did paragraphs back and forth, and I never once got called on. Not once. I was the only person that didn't get called on. She would look at me and kind of just like look to the rest of the people, and I feel like I know how to read. I do it just fine. So it's like assumptions like that. Like I guess she was trying to do the right thing. She thought she was being nice, but at the same time, I
Sure.
was the single only person in the class that never read that whole semester. And I'm sure that people noticed. There were only like 30 of us in there. So I think that kind of took people off guard.
That's tough.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know that students with disabilities have to meet all the same admission
Everything.
requirements as any other student. In fact, it's illegal for a university to take into account a person's disability, whether it's to accept them because they have a disability or to not accept them. So they have to take that completely out of the equation. So all the test scores and SAT scores and ACT, all of those students with disabilities have to meet those. Therefore, you know, they have to be what we call otherwise qualified to be here. So if you're here, it's because you deserve to be here, and your disability is not, a factor.
Yeah.
But a lot of people think that it's there is a different level expected for some reason, and
Then
that's
there
not
shouldn't
true.
be.
Right.
That's kind of the point of accommodations, is to make it a level playing field. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, we do get accommodations, but that's just so we kind of like have the same advantage of other people. And like it really, really hurts in the long run if they're gonna baby us or tell us we don't have to do this assignment.
I feel like I'm missing
Shauna's
out of
like-
all this.
Shauna's like, I want these.
But I think I'd rather be held to a higher standard like that. I'd kind of rather be pushed, but these professors, I haven't really had many professors that don't like push you. They're like, oh, you don't have to do this. Oh, like I have to do it.
Right,
I have to meet
sure.
the same requirements.
Absolutely.
Definitely don't get that. In fact, I'm taking a class with another professor I've taken before, and she's like, "Now I know what you're capable of.
Yeah.
You expect some hard stuff." And I'm
Uh-huh.
like, "Oh man, I totally did not foresee that."
Did I mention that I have a disability? So kind of taking the opposite approach. What would your message be, anybody, to the people that are watching this video?
You know, I'm a person like everyone else, and you know, I have strengths and I have weaknesses, and it doesn't make me any, thing less than another student. So there's really no difference between me and the person sitting next to me. So
Sure.
Mine would be establish some sense of responsibility to that person. And I'm using person, not just person with a disability, because everybody needs to know this, and always instill in a person to focus on what they're strong at and don't always dwell on what they're weak at. So in the future, they know this is what I can do, so let me work at this and show you what I can do, and what I'm weak at I'll make up for, and just continue to work hard and just be the responsible person of high standards that I can be.
Sure. Right. Any suggestions
I
from
think
you
it's
guys?
just
or-
like asking kind of what we need. Like you were saying initially, just what can I do to help? And like that's really, I know a lot of people don't want to disclose, so that simple question, they don't have to disclose to tell you what they need. It can just be like a general thing. And I really think that's just the most important thing, and never making assumptions, because that's the hardest thing I have, is like stereotypes and assumptions. And people aren't necessarily being ignorant, they just don't know enough about it. So I mean, like I've had professors take the time to actually figure it out and understand where I'm coming from and understand the actual disability itself, but it's really hard to have to go through, I mean, not just professors, but life with people stereotyping you and, oh, the disabled person, that's not right. That's such a small part of all of us.
Absolutely. Gotcha. Any closing words, Shauna? Any final message?
I feel like I'm all talked out.
Yeah, sure.
It's hard for I can understand how it's hard for faculty to make that personal connection with their students because they have so many of them. But I think that it goes a long way that if that connection can be established in any manner. Just I feel like the student is more involved and the professor is more involved, and overall you have a much better experience in the class if you have that connection, that personal connection.
Right.
Just understanding and the willingness to help if needed, kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, so to speak. Yeah. Is there anything else that anybody else would like to add?
I think disability culture is really coming a long way. Because it really wasn't that long ago. You had a disability, you were secluded, you were sent off to places, you know, and like I feel like we're slowly but surely kind of coming to it. Like hopefully in the future we wouldn't even need to have these kind of talks with professors and with people. Like hopefully it just gets to be understanding. I think it's like finally like I guess acceptable in our society. Like there's still assumptions and stereotypes, but I do hope we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Some people say that disability rights are like the last of the frontier for civil rights, you know, and in fact, the ADA came from the Civil Rights Act, and so some people say this is one of the final minority groups that is fighting for their civil rights, you know, and trying to expand awareness of their rights. So, but I agree. I think that's happening. And I think our university does a really good job of expressing interest. I think there's always a lot to learn and ways to grow in terms of accessibility and universal design, but it's fantastic that they are interested in those things. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, I think that's really great. Does anyone have any brief personal stories that you would like to share? Kevin?
When I was younger and still today, I always try to be included, try to be a part of the crowd. I like doing various activities, being very active, and playing sports and things like that. But I couldn't always participate. I wanted to play football, and that's something I really love. It's my favorite sport, but I was never able to play. The one time I got to play, I was about 8 years old, put on some pads, went to practice, and they have like a heads up drill, and you just go and you tackle the other person on the other side, and tackled them very hard, and after that they pulled me off.
Really?
And that was it. But in high school I actually got the opportunity to wrestle, and I did that for 4 years, and years before that I did basketball and ran track and made AAU nationals with track. So my dream of being a football player didn't come true, but with track, basketball, and wrestling, I kind of got to live that dream.
You did a lot of other sports.
Yeah.
For sure.
Did other things, yeah.
And talking about assumptions, again, I think a lot of people would assume that based on your disability that you wouldn't be able to do any sports, and you totally can do sports.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my story's not as motivational, I suppose. But, when I was in elementary school, when I first started going to school, we weren't really sure what was going on. We kind of knew that I was a little different. We didn't really pinpoint how, but I would have to see the counselor, and the counselor would kind of help me figure out how things were and how everything worked in my space and stuff like that. And what she would say is, if anyone gives you a hard time, you feel like you're being bullied, all you have to do is just walk away. Just walk away. It'll be okay. Just don't worry about it.
Right.
And my 5-year-old little self, I guess I was getting picked on. I got in an argument with someone. I don't know. I got upset, and so I was like, I just need to walk away. And so I walked away. I actually walked out of school and walked all the way home. And and my mom's like, "What are you doing here? It's like 12 o'clock in the afternoon. You're supposed to be in school." And I'm like, "They told me to walk away, so here I am."
That's great.
Yeah.
That is great.
They did not find it as amusing at the time, but it's pretty hilarious after the fact.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I think so too.
I think a good thing, like what I was telling you earlier, no one really thought I was going to make it through high school or whatever. I guess the whole disability, the assumption, she's not going to make it, she's not going to go to college. So when I got accepted to college, they were all like, how'd you do this? And then I texted my mom the other day, and I was like, I registered for classes, I'm finally a senior, it's kind of scary. She was like, I'd say more amazing, didn't think you'd ever graduate high school. And I was like, Mom, what are you talking about?
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah, so I mean, it feels good though. It feels really good to prove everybody wrong, without anything else.
Absolutely. And I know your mom was joking with you
She
and
thinks
saying,
she's hilarious.
oh,
She
that's
thinks she's
amazing
so
that
funny.
you're going to, but I bet, you know, as a mom, I would
Yeah,
be
they really didn't think I
probably
was
in
gonna do it.
tears
Yeah.
and be so happy that you have made it, not
Yeah.
only through high school, but all the way through
Yeah.
undergrad.
We have that conversation a lot. I was really close to my counselor in high school. She really helped me. And going back to visit her, I probably went back maybe like last semester, and she was like, this is amazing. She's like, this is
Wow.
crazy. Like, I didn't think this would ever happen. Which, I mean, like, yeah, that's really nice of you to say, but at the same time, that kind of leaves an assumption that people with disabilities can't make it.
Yeah.
So I think, like, professors saying stuff like that kind of hurts as well.
Like, it's so amazing that you're here today. It's like,
Exactly. Do you tell
Sure.
everybody
yeah,
this?
I mean, like, what's so different about me being here compared to everybody else being here?
Exactly.
Right, right, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
How does it make you feel when someone doesn't understand what you're going through?
I don't know. It's very frustrating because you're trying to get a point across and you're trying to tell them, like, this is something I deal with, you know. It doesn't go away when I leave your classroom. Like, this is a 24/7 thing that I have to deal with, and it's not just for your classroom. So it can be really difficult to get them to understand, like, where you're coming from and, like, what you need and why you need it, because a lot of times they just don't understand.
Right, right. That's a good point, that it continues outside of your classroom, your hour and 15 minutes with me. There's way more to that, sure.
It is. It's really, really difficult because, like, even though your disability is a small portion of you, you're always reminded. Like, I'm never like, oh, yeah, I have a disability. Like, it's always there. Like, there's always something reminding you. And, like, trying to explain it to somebody, you can talk about it all day long. You can tell them your experiences. You can tell them about your hospital visits and all the procedures and this and that, but they're never going to understand it. And it's really, really frustrating. Like, I don't know a single other person that even has my disability because it's not very common. And so it's, like, really hard to try and explain things. Like, I'm sure my mom understands because my mom's been there. My mom's seen everything. My mom's, like, superwoman at this point. But it's really hard to try and talk to people. And I know even when you tell professors, like, an overview, like, if you want to disclose this is what it is, people are never going to understand. And even somebody with your disability, even they aren't going to understand you. So I think that's probably the hardest part about living with a disability. And like you said, professors, I don't think they realize this affects everything. It affects the way I do my homework. It affects the way I walk down the street. It affects the way I wake up in the morning. So I think that's definitely the hardest part about having it.
Right.
And even like living coming to college and living on campus or living on your own period, living with people you don't necessarily know, it's like you have to go through that whole step of explaining yourself and telling about yourself, and somebody may get annoyed with how you have to do things, but you know, you live together, you have to learn how to live in one household and deal with one another, and when they're asking you these questions, you can't really explain to them because they don't live the same life that you live. But I mean, at the same time, you know, I'll always ask somebody, you know, how do you see things, you know, or how do you live, why do you do this, why do you do that? So it's just as frustrating trying to deal with other people too. So
Sure.
yeah.
I think predominantly it's frustrating. It's depressing too. Like, every time someone tells me that I'm just not trying hard enough, they don't realize that I'm already trying as hard as I can just to meet the standard that I'll never meet. You know what I mean? And I don't even understand why I have to meet it. Right? Because it's not something that affects me personally. It's something that affects everybody else.
That's a good point.
You
Right.
know? So for me, I'm already trying to meet the standard, and it's just really frustrating when someone just says, well, you're just not trying hard enough, or you're just not doing it right, or, you know, any of those other things, because you've just automatically just wiped away all the efforts that I'm already putting in just right off the bat.
Right. That lack of understanding of the time and energy that you've already put into this, and that it's a lot.
There's a difference between ignorance and just being closed-minded. Ignorance, you don't know, but, you know, hopefully you're willing to learn a little bit more about it. What I encounter all the time is well beyond ignorance. It's simply a dismissal, an automatic dismissal over everything that I'm already going through, and an unwillingness to learn anything about it. Like, it's not that people don't see things from my point of view. It's that people don't want to see things from my point of view. And that's what really, really is upsetting.
That's very well put. Yeah. There's a distinction there for sure.
Yeah.
And like sometimes it can be hard to tell faculty, but at least telling them you have your letter of accommodation, it's easy to explain it. Like telling people that you just meet, like when Mrs. Do walk up, hey, I'm Anna, this is my disability. Like it's kind of hard, like in your personal and social life, to like bring that up. Like when's a good time to even talk about that, you know? And so that can be frustrating too. And then when you first say it, they're kind of like, oh God, you have a disability? Like, what am I supposed to do now? So it's difficult. It's frustrating.
My favorite response is, oh, but you seem so normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure, like what is normal,
Yeah.
I would say.
I'm normal.
Right.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm normal.
Yeah, sure. Somebody told me one time that normal is like a setting on a washing machine or dryer, and that's about it. That's really the only appropriate use of the word normal.
Yeah. You do have people like that. Like, wait, how you're normal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
just like-
sure, but this still occurs in my life. And then you have the people like, oh, I can't imagine, but you really can't imagine. Like, I hear that all the time, too. It's like, I can't imagine what you go through. And in the back of my head, I'm like, I know. You really can't. Like, it's difficult.
Right, right. And that's got to be difficult, just people who are really trying to just interact with you and trying to, maybe they're trying to relate, but I don't know if you encounter a lot of, I don't know how you deal with that kind of thing. And they're trying to relate, but you're like, well, I'm not dying, you know. Is that difficult? Does that happen?
Yeah.
Well, there's also like stereotypes, and I guess like people don't realize that we hear these stereotypes like every day. So you know, the 5th day you've heard it in a row, you're kind of like, you know what?
Yeah.
That's not how it is. And then people get like, oh, like they were so upset about it, and like, you know, I didn't mean to make them angry. And it's like, but they don't realize that they're not the first person to ask that question, and they're not the first person to assume it. So.
Good point.
Yeah, like, we're not trying to be bitter when we answer you, but it's kind of like, come on, guys. Think through what you're about to say to me.
And as doing class presentations, I know you all have encountered, we've done several class presentations this semester, and I've noticed sort of a pattern of assumptions and questions. Many times you all will get almost the exact same question in every class, and you're very patient about answering it and explaining, and it's great, but very different classes, very different subjects, yet you get the same type of assumptive, I guess, questions.
Well, that's why I love doing stuff like this. Like, I love being able to talk to classes and do this kind of stuff to inform people, because hopefully we don't get those kind of questions, you know, and like hopefully it kind of just opens people's mind and stuff like that, which is why I love being able to go talk to classes and inform them, so we don't have to do that. But it is kind of hard, like you said, when we get those questions, we're like, what are you talking about? But we also have to remember, like, these people may have never even talked to somebody with our disability, so it does kind of go both ways at the same time.
Right, there's some nuance there. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Like, you can tell people are just like so much more careful with you and stuff like that. Like, out in like your social life, people are kind of like, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, when it's hard. Or like people forget. Like, people, you'll like have a disability and people forget, and they're like going to do all these crazy things, and you're kind of like, can't do that. But they don't like take that into consideration before they ask, and then they're taken back when you can't do stuff. And
Yeah, kind of goes both extremes.
yeah,
Right.
definitely.
So, for the people that are going to be watching this video that we've made today, what type of impact do you hope this will make?
Well, I hope it doesn't just impact their teaching. I kind of hope it kind of just impacts, not necessarily their life, but I hope they realize that I don't just have to deal with this in my classes. Maybe be more open-minded to everything in general, like out in society, dealing with people that aren't involved with the school at all. That's kind of like the main thing. Because if you can do that, if you can generalize it to your whole life, then when you bring it as your professor and stuff like that, you can actually really deal with it in the right way.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah, I think just a desire to want to educate themselves on what they're interacting with their students, I think would be a good benefit to everyone involved. You know, because the professor is going to set the tone on that relationship. You know, so I mean, the professor is really going to lead that whole thing. So if they watch these videos and don't take anything from it, and they're going to continue to perpetuate the same type of negative interactions, that student is just going to carry that with them throughout their, their whole college experience.
And it's very formative time, so that would really stick.
I'll tag onto what Shauna said. As far as the relationship, the connection that the professor may build with the person, is what I want them to take most out of this video. Because you set the tone for how that person is going to think as far as a student, or maybe how that person is going to think, as far as after they leave your course. You could be like that role model who stepped into my life and told me, you can do this, and really established some sense of confidence for myself and gave me that sense of responsibility that I needed to be successful. So.
I think it's important for people to realize that a disability is it's not just, the person in the wheelchair. That a lot of disabilities you can't even see and you don't even know it. So when you talk about a stereotype and you're making fun of someone, that you may not even know that the person that you're making fun of is like standing right next to you. So you might say something, like, oh, they can't see, they're blind as a bat. And the person right next to you might actually be blind as a bat. So.
I've had that happen before. I've heard people out in public, they're making fun of a disability. I'm like, it's my disability, what are you talking about? So it is hard, like you were saying, you can't be doing that kind of stuff.
Right. That's a great point. Well, I think this has been really good conversation, and I want to thank all of you for participating in this and for doing this discussion, and I hope that this provides some insight, some perspective or awareness to disability culture, as well as the services that are provided on our campus for students with disabilities. If you'd like more information, you can refer to our website. Thank you.